So we have some questions from people out there. Since I don't have my glasses, I'll let you be the reader.
Okay. From Danny Alexander earlier, he said, what is the best way to approach curing chronic urticaria stroke angioedema? So you start at the gut, sugars, parasites. That's his question.
Yeah.
So I was going to use that as an opportunity to say to explain how I would deal with something like that from the point of view that this is obviously medical terminology. And so these are the kinds of questions that I get quite a lot, Paul gets a lot, and they come up on the Facebook page a lot. And often it's because you've got, a slightly scary sounding medical, polysyllabic word there. And we're drawn into the detail of that. And so the way I would handle this is I would certainly Google that or look in one of my textbooks to get a background. But once you've got the background to it, then you apply your Chek principles. So with urticaria, for example, and angioedema, we know that they're immune-related issues. And so then straight away we want to think, well, what could be sensitizing the immune system?
Mm-hmm.
And so the first thing I would think of is the gut, as you say, sugars and parasites, that's part of the equation.
Yeah.
And the reason I think of the gut is because 80% of the immune system is surrounding the gut, because that is the very part of you where you're trying to absorb stuff that isn't yourself to become part of yourself. So the rest of your body is pretty much designed to create barriers. But the gut, you're trying to absorb things through. So that's why it's heavily armed, like a fortress. And so if you've got something going on there in the gut, which, many examples, you've got the example here of parasites, but it could be any kind of dysbiosis, so imbalance there, or it could be any kind of inflammation in the gut, which can be caused by many different things, from medical drugs to chlorinated water to, pro-inflammatory foods, and then of course food intolerances is a classic one as well. Yeah. So there's a few things that I would address there and look into. There's
the issues of food insensitivity. For example, you see a lot of people with food allergies have that broken red blood vessels around the nose and the kind of reddening of the skin that's classic with this type of situation. But there's another thing too, and that is that, we might start off with one or two food intolerances, but if we have a leaky gut, which means the barriers become permeable, and before I go on, remember the number one cause of leaky gut syndrome is stress. Then right behind that is alcohol consumption, and then medical drugs, and I can't remember which one of those comes next, medical drugs or alcohol consumption, but it's probably a toss-up between the three. So right here we're looking at three very common insults to the body. Stress, which is usually our way of relating to the world, and the challenges we face there. Alcohol consumption, which is rampant, and then medical drugs, which have, most people don't even look into the side effects of the drugs that they're taking. But the point that I'm making is we can start off with, say, an allergy to gluten. But if we don't realize the food we're eating is inflaming our gut, making it permeable, then once the gut's permeable, everything that you eat or drink now gets through the gut undigested, which triggers off the development of antibodies against that. And so you can end up with patients, I've had many patients with over 40 food intolerances. I've seen as high as 50 something. And when a person gets their test results back, they often break down in tears and they go, oh my God, that's everything that I eat.
Yeah.
And so then we get into the issue of cross-reactivity. So as the immune system gets sensitized to one thing, it gets sensitized to other things. So one thing can trigger off sensitivity to another, and the next thing you know, you don't realize it, but you're having an immune reaction to almost everything you're eating and drinking. And then you get things like, well, if you're wearing a certain type of cologne every day, and those chemicals are getting into your body when your immune system's sensitized, and if you keep pushing that far enough, then you get an autoimmune disorder, which is becoming very, very common today.
Yeah. And, hydration would be another real key one that I would think of straight away, particularly when you see histamine response, which is one of the causes of urticaria. So in Batman Gillige's book, Your Body's Many Cries for Water, he explains all the physiology behind it. But when you are dehydrated, your histamine response is exaggerated.
Yeah.
So that's another key thing that could be a good first aid type approach, but an important just general lifestyle approach. So I personally, over the years, have suffered with hay fever, and as long as I keep gluten out of my diet, then it's fine. But occasionally, I'll just get a little inkling of it coming on, and it's almost always when I'm dehydrated. So if I can just top up with water, then it goes away. So that's another example of a histamine response. So I recommend that for sure.
Yeah. So that's probably enough. I mean, I could go on for hours with a question like that, but I think that kind of gives us a holistic look at that.
Okay, so the next one is from Marcos Anaya. Paul, I'd like to know, in your opinion, what's the best way to go into physical training when you haven't done anything strength-wise in a year? Also, what is the best way to guarantee that good nutritional habits progress and remain?
Well, the answer to the first question is it depends on how much fitness you've been getting from the activities of daily living. For example, if you're a carpenter or some kind of builder or a park ranger or somebody who has a physical job, then even after a year off, you're going to be at a higher level of fitness of someone that just sits in a desk. If you're at a very low level of fitness, I typically recommend that people start off with a month or two of just aerobic exercise, whether that be walking, rowing machines, and I always encourage a variety so you get a multiple of motor patterns. If you just use a bicycle, you're very limiting in your motor development, what I call the motor vocabulary. And that does not exclude weightlifting. Then you're in what I call the yellow zone, so I tell people, go to the gym, but don't lift anything heavier than you can breathe naturally with. For example, if you try to pick up something you can only lift a couple of times, you're going to have to hold your breath to use the diaphragm to stabilize your core. So now you're in a purely anaerobic state, which means that the load through the tissues and the kinetic load is very, very high. The susceptibility to injury is high. But if you're going to do a deadlift with a weight that's light enough that you can inhale as you lift it, exhale as you lower it, without putting a risk on your body, which in my observation means you're going to be somewhere between 22 and 30 repetitions that you should be able to do with that exercise. So then if you look at my primal pattern system, squat, lunge, bend, push, pull, twist, and gait, walking, running, and sprinting, we'll leave the sprinting out because that's too explosive. What you can do is you can work those primal patterns. So if you look at my book, Movement That Matters, it has those in it. Scientific core conditioning goes into the primal patterns and explains them. But if you go to the gym and you simply mix those patterns, so you could do walking lunges with a light weight, you could do multi-directional lunges, you could do deadlifts, you could do cable pushes, cable pulls, you could do almost any exercise in a gym, but by keeping the intensity low enough that you can breathe with it, you begin to develop the motor patterns, and as long as you've got enough skill or support to use good form, and if you don't, you want a trainer, as long as you're using good form, you will find, according to Digby Sales research from Montreal, Canada, you can gain about 30% in strength just from enhancing intermuscular coordination and facilitating the motor pathways. So you can actually gain a fair bit of functional strength without having to lift heavy in these initial periods, like about the first 3 months. Then as you develop skill in the motor pattern and your body feels more comfortable with exercise and you've oxygenated the system and built capillary beds which aid in your speed of anaerobic recovery, if you have a good basic aerobic base, then you actually can recover from things like lactic acid buildup quicker. So then you just make a natural progression into more specific base conditioning where you're now using the same lifts at a higher intensity, and you just work your way up from there. And that's covered in my program design courses, how to build somebody up like that.
Yeah. And you can bear in mind as well that of course the zone exercises themselves can be quite good kind of work hardening type exercises, because they're getting you to move through those patterns that you may be using under higher intensities further down the line, as Paul just described. So that's another thing to bear in mind. And
the zone exercises are in How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy. So there's a whole section on the zone exercise, and if you use How to Eat, Move and Be Healthy and fill out the questionnaires, it actually tells you which zone or zones will support you with the systems in your body that are under high stress. So instead of it just being exercise, it becomes holistic healing that includes exercise as a therapeutic modality. So that's a pretty good, safe, general protocol that I've used for years very effectively.
Okay, great. So we've got a question from Zach Cline. It says, when it comes to NMT/NST and structural leg length inequalities,
yes,
have you found ways of correcting this without shoe lifts or for 5 fingers wearers?
Well, yeah, there's 1,000 ways. I mean, you know, that's where the Chek totem pole gets involved. So it can be, we'll leave the psyche out of it, but you can have occlusal problems. So if your teeth don't fit together properly, your eyes, ears, and teeth have to be level with the horizon. That's your reference point, so you can see across the horizon and recognize what might want to eat you and see what you want to eat. So the whole craniocervical system, your eyes have to have a neutral point so that your eyes know where neutral is. In other words, if you didn't have a neutral point, like if I didn't just relax and look forward at you, if my eyes were sitting over here, that would take muscular effort. So when people have things like imbalances in the eye muscles, which can come from trauma, and in fact, if you look at the research of Janet Travell and David Simons in the trigger point manuals, you would probably be surprised to find how many muscles in the body actually have referral zones into the eye region. Paul St. John said when I did my neuromuscular therapy training that the eyes actually are, they have more referral zones running through the eyes than any one area of the body.
Wow. Yeah.
So if you have a jaw that's not fitting together, then your body will adjust the head to try to make the teeth fit together, which can then induce a scoliosis, which comes with a pelvic torsion and therefore a functional leg length discrepancy.
Yeah. I think he's asking specifically about structural leg length inequality.
Oh, structural leg length.
And so, I mean, in terms of 5 fingers, if you're talking about trying to find a shoe lift for that, that's a kind of tricky one. But one thing that you can bear in mind is that, of course, single leg work, so single leg squats, single leg deadlifts, that kind of thing, instantly rules out any issues with the leg length discrepancy. Yeah. And actually, so does running, really, because it's on one leg the whole time. You're only ever on one leg. That's the definition of running. So technically, a leg length discrepancy shouldn't affect your running pattern, even a structural one, and especially with the forefoot strikes. If you think about, you mentioned the 5 fingers. If you're running in 5 fingers, which would tend to induce a forefoot strike, well, now you've got all of this range of plantar flexion, which means that, let's say you've got a 2 centimeter difference, well, you just need to plantar flex by that much more to strike the ground. So there's this kind of innate inbuilt mechanism to adapt for leg length discrepancy, I believe, if you're running the right way. If you're standing around or trying to lift a heavy load through 2 legs, then that's a bit more of an issue, but there would be ways to work with that. How would you do that?
Well, there's a couple things that I want to point out. One, yeah, I do have a leg length discrepancy, 5 millimeters in my left leg from a cliff diving accident where I broke my left leg in 5 places. But I do pretty good and I wear 5 fingers all the time since they came out. But this is part of my point that I'm about to make. One of the real problems with people that have structural leg length discrepancies that wear 5 fingers or any shoes is that they keep running on roads and sidewalks. And so if you're running on a road, let's say that you're running on the road and your left leg is the short leg, and you're running on a road and the camber's to the right, so the center of the road is to the right. So in the United States, if you're running against the traffic, your right foot's always going to be on the high side. It's the long leg. So if you've got a short left leg like I do, it's almost like you're stepping into a hole every time. So it can create a lot of problems in the low back because we're not designed to run on paved surfaces. We're not designed to run on flat surfaces that don't change. So anybody that has a leg length discrepancy should stick to trail running where there's a variety of surface changes and terrain changes, or they're going to probably run into trouble because ultimately you end up stepping into a hole if you're not running evenly. And then, other things that can affect it. For example, I have seen people that developed chronic shortening of the Achilles because, like you said, they can adapt for it, but over time they start getting chronic reduction in dorsiflexion, which can then bother them when they're walking in their shoes and things. But the thing I want to point out here is that a huge amount of what people call structural leg length discrepancy is actually incorrectly diagnosed.
Yeah, I agree.
If you look at the research of Grieve, a famous British physiotherapist, he looked into leg length discrepancies, bony landmarks, and he showed that the average human being has about up to 1/4 of an inch of leg length discrepancy naturally. That's just the normal range of human beings. But you can have a number of issues going on. I'll give you an example. A lot of people have been told that they had structural leg length problems when really what they had is trigger points in their quadratus lumborum.
Yeah.
And so if you got the quadratus lumborum, for those who don't know, is the deepest muscle in the low back. So if you got, which easily comes when you have stress in kidneys or digestive organs or many other factors, the quadratus lumborum is an easily excitable muscle. And if you have an abdominal wall deficiency because you're inflamed in your gut, then your quadratus lumborum starts contracting to try to stabilize the spine. And then if you've got a right-handed person who does handedness patterns, you can get asymmetrical quadratus lumborum contractions. And the quadratus lumborum, as it tightens, lifts the ilium up. So when you actually lay that person on the table and their pelvis is twisted, it actually really does look like they have a structural leg length discrepancy to the underskilled therapist. But with proper assessment, you find out that they don't. And back to where I was, many people that have been diagnosed with structural deficiencies have teeth problems, eye problems, upper cervical problems, and lo and behold, when you correct those, they don't. So it depends on how you're measuring it, and the only way you can really rely on whether or not you have a true leg length discrepancy, a structural one, is with a scanogram, which is a X-ray system with a ruler, a measuring device calibrated right into it, and the X-rays are taken at real-life measurements so they can tell you exactly how long your tibia is on the left versus the right, your femur is versus the left and the right. And the other thing is that you can have an asymmetrical hemipelvis. I've actually seen a case of someone whose left hemipelvis was 16 millimeters shorter than their right hemipelvis. And they thought they had a leg length discrepancy. But ultimately, to get rid of that person's back pain, I had to develop a butt lift for them. So like a piece of Airex rubber mat cut into a little donut that they carried with them and still do to this day. So when they sit in a chair, they put it down and square the pelvis up. So if someone has a true bony leg length discrepancy, depending on what they're doing and what activities they're doing, you may actually have to go to either a heel lift. If it's too big, you got to go to a full shoe lift, or you run into problems like you can only put so much heel lift before your heel won't stay in your shoe. Once you start getting more than about, most people, shoes won't hold you in once you start approaching 1 centimeter of heel lift, so you end up having to go to full lifts. So if you're using asymmetrical activities like running and things like that, where there's a variety of motor activity, you can get away with a lot. But if you're doing stuff like weightlifting or rowing or anything where you're trying to distribute load through both extremities evenly, you get a lot of torsion problems, ligament problems. And if you don't address those things effectively, then the torque in the pelvis goes right up through the spine. And because the eyes, ears, and teeth, in other words, if you create a compensatory torque in your spine, your head can't go like this. So it has to correct itself. So then you start seeing a lot of problems in the upper cervical spine and the neck, because that's the juncture where the compensation ultimately takes place. So the atlas axis complex becomes the goaltender. It's the last place that you can maintain optic, otic, and occlusal planes in optimal relationships. So you end up seeing a lot of neck problems in people that actually have leg length problems because they're not addressing it effectively.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got one more question.
The middle one?
Okay.
Because then you can answer some of it.
Do you find walking in Vibrams everywhere to be appropriate or comfortable, particularly predictable solid surfaces, with the stabilised muscles not being called upon? Are flat, hard surfaces hurting us barefoot? Okay, There they are.
There's my shoes, and they go everywhere that I go, even in the freezing cold.
So, there's I think a useful thing to understand about the foot, and that is the notion of tensegrity, which is a composite word, which is tension and integrity. So the ligaments and the muscles and tendons provide tension, and the bones provide integrity. And when you load it, they all pull on each other, and it should deform and then recoil to its original shape. So a lot of things do this. So like a basketball would be another good example. When you hit it against the ground, it deforms, but then it returns to its original shape, and that's why it bounces back up.
Mm-hmm.
So,
or a trampoline.
Oh, a trampoline. Yeah. So there's lots of different examples. But the reason that tensegrity is really useful to answer this question is that if your foot is behaving like a deflated basketball, then it's obviously not going to bounce back up. Okay, if it's well inflated, then it's going to bounce back up. And so Professor Lieberman, who's a researcher, professor at Harvard University, he explains that the most efficient surface for a human being to run across is solid steel. But that would be a functional human being with a functional foot. So there's a very important delineation to make, because if you're barefoot and you're running on something solid, then you'll recoil beautifully off of that. Just like a basketball recoils beautifully off of a basketball court, not so well off the grass and terribly on the sand. Mm-hmm. It's the same principle with the foot. But again, it doesn't matter with the basketball, or it doesn't matter what the surface is. If the basketball's deflated, it's not going to bounce well on any of those surfaces. So the deflated ball is like an overpronating foot, a foot that's lost its conditioning. Often it's quite a simple thing to correct. Requires a bit of work, just like anything else, but a real simple drill that you can do is to get someone to just lay down on a foam roller longitudinally. So the foam roller is lengthways down their back. Just pick up one foot, and what you'll see is that their arch will appear on the standing foot, and nearly always they'll be in a perfectly neutral position. And so that just highlights both to you and to them that their foot is totally capable of forming an arch, but it's unloaded, and they've got a balance stimulus there as well, so that's stimulating their tonic nervous system to fire up the tonic muscles and muscle fibres. So then all we have to do is apply the same Chek principles as normal and just work them up, progress them up. So once they can do their postural training variables in that laying down position, then we could move them up to laying on a Swiss ball, then maybe some single leg work, and then start loading them more heavily. So that would be a very simple progression, and it would mean that, yes, absolutely, you can walk on or run on hard surfaces. But as Paul said earlier, we haven't evolved to, so we take an evolutionary stance on it. We certainly evolved in very hard surfaced areas, because Africa is baked pretty much hard as concrete most of the year. And what's more is it's got wetter over the last 2 million years. So when our ancestors were first becoming bipedal and running around, and we do have quite strong evidence they did quite a lot of running as part of the human or the hominid biomechanics are very well adapted for running. So the best of the evidence points to a lot of running on very hard surfaces, but they were not flat surfaces. There would have been a lot of variability in the terrain, jumping around rocks, jumping over logs, all that kind of thing. So that would be my take on it.
What I would add to that is that a couple of things. One of the most important ways to restore the arch and the functionality of the foot is to simply allow the foot to function like it's designed to function, and it cannot do that in a standard shoe. I won't go into a long lecture on shoe function, but the five finger is the only shoe, with a few new modern exceptions that really were tag-ons to the five finger concept that came along after, jumping on the bandwagon. But the five finger allows individual action of your toes. It allows your toes to stay spread in a more natural way. It doesn't obstruct the normal mechanics of the foot. It doesn't restrict the foot. And it doesn't overly support the foot either, right? If you overly support a foot, then you actually have the effect of a brace on the body. If you use a neck brace too long, you get weak. A back brace too long, you get weak. So the five finger really is the closest you can get to the dynamics of a normal foot. The problem I see a lot of people getting into is they buy a pair of five fingers and they try to wear them all day, or they try to work out in them full bore or do long runs in them, and they don't realize that that's activating muscles and patterns that their body's not used to, so they get overload and pain and discomfort. So the way I teach people is, when you buy a pair of 5 fingers, just wear them until your feet start to get a little sore and take them off.
Yeah.
And then go back to your normal shoes and say, okay, today I wore them for an hour and 10 minutes. Well, tomorrow try to wear them for an hour and a half or until your feet get sore. And when you can wear your 5 fingers all day long with no discomfort, then you're ready to begin working out in them, even if it's running for a half an hour. If you run for a half an hour before you can walk all day, you're probably going to get discomfort. But the key thing that I'm trying to say here is that when you wear the 5 fingers and break them in and allow the foot to functionally adapt, I've seen lots of people who's had flat feet and started to develop an arch and were like, oh my God, I'm getting an arch back. Now there's a bunch of different types of exercises that you can do to enhance the strength of the feet as well. For example, you can go out in your backyard and you can walk around on your heels until your anterior tibialis or the dorsiflexor muscles of your ankles and feet get tired. Then you can walk on your toes until you're tired. Then you can walk on the outer edges of the feet until you're tired. You can walk on the inner edges. Most people don't need too much walking on the inner edge if they're overpronated, but walking supinated on the outer edge, on the toes and on the heels, and even some on the inner edge just for motor variety, and just keep rotating. So when you're on your outer edge and they're tired, go to the inner edge. When that's tired, go to the heels. When that's tired, go to the toes. When that's tired, go to the outer edge. And just keep rotating. And again, build yourself up till you can do 10 or 15 minutes of that. And that enhances the intrinsic muscles of the feet. It enhances the motor control of the whole leg and its foot-ground interaction. Then there's other more specific exercises you can do, such as leaving a towel. The best place for most people is to put it in front of the toilet. Take a hand towel or a bath towel, throw it on the floor, and while you're sitting on the toilet, just start grabbing the towel with your toes and try to curl the towel so you draw the whole towel towards you. That's one approach. Another approach I used for years in my clinical environment was to have people buy a bag of marbles, just kids' marbles, put the bowl of marbles on the ground, and then have another bowl and use your toes to pick up marbles from one bowl and load them into the other bowl, and work your left leg till it's tired, then your right leg till it's tired, and then when it's time to leave the toilet, then get up and go. And by doing a combination of those exercises, usually within about a year, a person can rebuild a pretty functional foot, as long as they don't go out and torture themselves by shortcutting the process and trying to be a superhero. In other words, before you're ready to do functional training, then you're out there killing yourself. Yeah,
there's some interesting research which shows a group of three different groups of people from India. One group that had grown up completely barefoot, another group that were mixed, another group that had grown up short. And what it showed is that they got them all to take their shoes off or just go as they were if they were already barefoot, and to walk across a force plate. And what you see is there's a completely different style of walking based on their background. And so I think it's important, particularly with the paleo kind of excitement that there's been the last few years, that we don't think that just because it's an evolutionary thing or mimics evolution, that it's something anyone can jump into. So I always explain there's the kind of evolutionary story, and then there's your own individual evolution or development. And so that's what Paul and I have been talking about, is actually building up that strength so that you're now ready for the shoes. Biomechanically and physiologically, your body can handle it, but only once it's been conditioned to the right level. So there's that side to it as well. Yeah. Okay.
Well, it looks like we're at the end of our time. Hey, it's been great to share with all you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll do more of these as we move forward in time, and love your participation, love your questions, and if there's things that you'd like us to elaborate on, or you'd like maybe to hear more about in my blogs, or courses that you'd like to learn, things you'd like to learn through the Chek Institute, let us know what your interests are, and we'll see how we can support everybody. And we're always looking for a consensus. If a lot of people want to learn about power animal retrieval, or about the psyche, or about viscerosomatic reflexes, well, then we're always interested in supporting your education. And though a lot of these things are covered in the Chek training, but at least maybe we can get you a primer and get you excited to go deeper. So thanks for joining us today. And thank you, Matthew, for being so committed for so many years.
Thank you.
And Matthew flew all the way from England to Melbourne to teach in Australia, then from Melbourne to here. That's commitment.
Thanks. Yes.
So thanks to all the Chek instructors in the Chek Institute and the Chek Institute staff as well. Bye-bye.
Bye.